Welcome to the Relational Presentation Overview session. We're going to take a fast and yet thorough look at what it means to be a visually interactive presenter. You'll see a style of communication that may one day completely change your perspective of giving a presentation. If you're joining us for the regular workshop sessions in the near future or reading through the book, this overview gives a sneak peek into what you'll be learning. In fact, we'll spend a few minutes at the end talking about the various workshop sessions and what they cover. Or, if you're with us simply out of curiosity to see the relational presentation process in action, we hope you find this time eye-opening and inspirational. Here's what we're going to do. We'll start off with a standard linear presentation that will last approximately 10 minutes, and then transition into the interactive portion of the program. Now, when I say interactive, I mean that in quotes because obviously, this particular broadcast is recorded. We frequently do this session as a live web broadcast, and then the interactions are the real thing. For our purposes here, though, I'll pretend that you're out there alive and well, and I'll simulate the types of interaction that typically do occur. Just use your imagination a bit. Your role will be to see yourself in the position of a live respondent. If you do go on to learn these techniques, the process we're imagining here will no longer be a simulation. Here's what I tell people in the live broadcast. I say, after we enter the interactive period, you're encouraged to interact with me and help direct the presentation at that point. If you do interact with me, I'll do my best to customize the visual display and topics to the ongoing dialogue. If you don't interact with me, that's okay too. In that case, I'll simply take you down the path that I want to travel. Either way, we'll end up at the same place, but how we get there will be up to you. Everything you're about to see is 100% PowerPoint. There's no other software involved. I'm not seeing anything on my screen that you don't see. I don't have any kind of presenter's view or a second monitor, for example. On the other hand, I will be using numerous optical illusions. Sometimes what you think is happening won't be happening at all, or conversely, I'll hide what really is happening. That's all part of the fun. All right, let's begin. Relational presentation is based on a concept called visual interactivity, where the presenter tries to connect what is said with what is shown on the spot. Now, often what this means is you're attempting to show your thoughts as they spontaneously occur. Doing so is very important because of the way our brains work. When we take in information, we don't just store it in a block. According to a theory called dual coding, visual information is encoded separately from verbal information in different areas of the brain. And that means when we give people information in both forms simultaneously, it apparently is stored twice, with meaningful links made between the two. And the result is potentially stronger recall and more complete understanding in our viewers. On the other hand, if we give people information in verbal form only, we're cutting off a huge way people potentially might process and store that message. Now, you may be thinking, hey, no problem. I use PowerPoint, and PowerPoint allows me to visually display my message. So I'm dual coding my message automatically. I'm both showing and telling my content at the same time, right? Well, that may be true to a point, but there are two very important issues to think about here. Most of us, when we use PowerPoint, do something like this. We fill slides with bullet point after bullet point after bullet point. And here's the problem. A bullet point list locks us into a fixed sequence. You know how it goes when you're in the middle of the list. What happens if someone asks a question? How are you going to answer that question visually when there's 7 more bullet points left before you can even get to the next slide, much less go somewhere else? Presenters typically respond to this situation in either of two ways. They say, you know, I have a slide coming up that addresses that issue. Just hold on and we'll get there. Or the other thing they do is simply abandon their slideshow for the moment and answer the questions verbally. In either case, they're not really visually answering the question at all. PowerPoint acts as a barrier to effective communication in this situation. Now, here's another problem with bullet points. Some research suggests that written text on a screen, even though we visually see it, may not be treated by our brain as visual information at all. Think about what happens when you're reading to yourself. You can actually hear yourself reading even though you're not saying a word. It's quite possible the brain is translating that visual text into verbal understanding and then storing it in the verbal channels. Now, if that's the case, it's questionable whether bullet point presentations add any meaningful visual stimulation to our message whatsoever. So the question then becomes, how much are we really visually communicating after all when we use PowerPoint? And you know what? It's not just bullet points that are causing this problem. When we deliver linear presentations, where we move from slide to slide to slide, we're locking ourselves into the same kind of rigid sequencing that occurs with bullet lists. What happens if you're on slide 10 and someone asks a question about something on slide 35? Or maybe that slide's in another show that you need. What if you're in a sales situation and someone raises an objection or shows signals of wanting to buy? What are you going to do? Ignore them and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, but the next slide doesn't talk about that issue. You'll have to wait 10 more slides until I get to that material." Again, PowerPoint in this situation is keeping us from communicating at our full potential. About 10 years ago, we started thinking, why are we doing this? Why are we allowing our computer to control what we say and when we say it? What if we were to completely rethink what it means to give a presentation? What if we were to think of our message as a system where individual pieces are connected together in meaningful ways? Then we could collect all those pieces together in one place, organize them into hierarchical structures, and interlink that content. We might even call something like that a presentation network, kind of like a website made of PowerPoint slides. Having such a structure would allow us to navigate to content on demand, showing only what is needed, exactly when it's needed. Some of the benefits of this approach would be answering random audience questions. Again, not only verbally, but visually. We could skip or add slides on the fly, without the audience even knowing the difference. Perhaps we think of a slide over in that other show somewhere that would be perfect to illustrate a spontaneous thought. In that case, we simply go get it and show it. We could even go so far as to completely customize our message on the spot. I'll tell you a story. I was traveling through Phoenix a while back to conduct training. A friend of mine said, "Hey, you're coming through town anyway. Would you mind stopping by our club and giving a talk on relational presentation?" I said, "Sure, no problem." And then she added, "I know you spoke to this group a year ago, but this time you probably will see about twice as many people there and a bunch of new faces." I said, "Great." I made a mental note to deliver the standard introductory speech that I normally give to all groups who haven't heard about visual interactivity. In fact, it's the same talk we're going through right now. So on the meeting day, I show up, set up my computer, take a seat. As we're getting started, I looked around the room and realized, you know what? I recognize almost every face in the room. There weren't new people after all, which meant that I was about to deliver the exact same talk to this group of people that I'd given a year before. That wasn't going to work. So, what do I do now? My computer is halfway across the room. It's impossible to change my presentation materials now anyway, even if I wanted to. I decided to do what I frequently do, and that's to make up a presentation as I went along, spontaneously. But the story doesn't end there. I was told I would have about 30 minutes to speak, and I knew this group had a fixed time when they had to be out of the room before another group came in. The person giving the announcements that day went on with his items, and I watched as my time slot dwindled to 15 minutes right before I was to start. So not only did I have to reconfigure my message at the last minute, I had to cut it in half. Had I been using a typical linear presentation in that situation, I would have been in trouble. As it was, I gave this group a spontaneous 15-minute, fully visual, interactive presentation, ended on time, And for all they knew, that was exactly the presentation I intended to deliver. That's the kind of flexibility and power you have with these techniques. Another benefit of using relational presentation is having the ability to display hidden detail on slides. The presenter can have supporting information on hand that the audience has no idea that's there and never sees unless that content is deemed relevant and helpful. Likewise, a resources section might be included where categories of information are available for quick retrieval, allowing the presenter to access that material at any time, anywhere, with a single click. And there may be a conclusion section available on every slide, so a speaker can access that content at any time as well, and simply end the performance. And that does formally end the initial linear presentation.